Hello! My name is Bisa, and welcome back again to the Pokemon Corundum Dev Diary. It's been a while since we talked again. I apologize profusely, but an absolutely crippling Palworld addiction hit me and my routine like a brick, and it was subsequently very hard to get the creative juices flowing for this one. But after about 12 hours of brute forcing my way into a rough outline and a much more casual 4-hour dev stream later, I was hitting the ground running. Not only was I able to finish Route 116, but since then I also got to implement a ton of other cool stuff that I'll be showing off today, including a feature that has been highly requested. Roll the clip! So, what do you think? Of course, this implementation isn't fully done yet, but I would like to take the occasion to introduce its coder and the first official member of the Corundum dev team, Zatsu. Now, if you recall, in the second video in this series, I went over my reasons as to why I initially wanted this project to be a binary hack. Obviously, the move to decomp was absolutely the correct choice, and I've even been able to do more than I expected to by myself, but it also opened many more possibilities that I simply could not implement without help. Bringing Zatsu on board was pretty much the perfect fit. They've been engaged in the development of this project pretty much from the word go, even becoming one of my first channel members. They have pretty extensive knowledge of the pokeemerald decompilation that Corundum is based on, and by their own admission, would have continued making serious contributions to the game anyways. So making it official was just kind of second nature. Now, let's talk about what we've actually done here, as we have added two major movement mechanics to the game that were shown in the clip just now. Due to the naturalistic shape and vastly expanded size of maps, the practicality of Gen 3's, or really any 2D Pokemon's movement mechanics start to be insufficient. Following a winding road becomes an exercise in vibrating your fingers on your D-pad to go the places you want to, or ends in you giving up and running into every other wall, not to speak of the sheer distance in tiles you actually need to cover. There are two main ways to combat this, and we have decided to implement both. As I mentioned, the first, and much more obvious feature, has been relatively highly requested already: diagonal movement. Now recently it has become a pretty popular factoid that the Gen 3 Pokemon games already have diagonal movement implemented, and that it's merely an unused or unfinished feature, similar to the infamously unfinished snow weather effect. But this couldn't be further from the truth, while still being technically right. You see, there are in fact the slimmest fragments of an implementation in the original code in the form of definitions that reserved ROM address space for the required components for digital movement. This is extremely common, heck, basically universal practice when you're mostly developing with a language like assembly that requires developers to actively figure out their memory management. So laying out the basic blocks of everything you have planned before starting is pretty much vital. But that's the thing. Beyond these base blocks, there is nothing here. Native diagonal movement in Gen 3 is a myth. No more, no less. However, that hasn't stopped one absolute mad lad, Lactozilla, from using those scraps, left behind basically as soon as development for the original game started, and filling in the blanks. So, one git pull command and some additional code gremlining later, thanks Zatsu, we have a mostly working implementation of diagonal movement. While we are missing graphics right now, the feature already works great, and we've even already squashed some pretty major bugs that just came as a result of the game now having a mode of movement that it simply wasn't designed with. Lactozilla has openly discouraged people from implementing his code into ROM hacks, not because he doesn't want them to, but because it's a bad idea, which is correct, but didn't stop us. Now, the second feature we implemented is a slightly higher concept. While diagonal movement is already going to alleviate a lot of having to frantically change directions, it's not going to stop the player from running face first into things and being stopped dead in their tracks. This is a problem the original games already have, but with how chaotic and detailed the maps can get in this project, this will end up being an absolute nightmare if we don't do something about it. Especially since with diagonal movement, you're still going to bonk on something, even if one of the compound cardinal directions you're holding in is free. Thankfully, the decomp hacking community already has us covered here too, with Pyredrid's grid running. A code snippet that attempts to make diagonal paths more viable, not by implementing diagonal movement, but by automating the player character turning to move around an obstacle if the game detects that there's a diagonal tile available in the direction they are running in. Seriously? This stuff is wild. It takes a moment to get used to, since obviously your muscle memory might throw you off a bit while playing at first, trying to correct for obstacles that are already being automatically corrected for. But once you get a feel for it, it becomes incredibly fun to just blaze down whatever trail you can find, with nothing but sheer walls able to stop you. And when you then combine it with our diagonal movement and do a little bit of code magic to make them work well together, again, thanks Zatsu, you end up with one of the creamiest, smoothest movement systems in not just all of Pokémon, but probably tile-based RPGs as a whole. It really is that good. But what good is a movement system for the gods if you don't have the maps to try it out on? And today we have two lined up again, Route 116 and a proper prototype for the Southwest Hoennian Wilderness. As I mentioned, getting started on Route 116 was a bit of a nightmare, because instead of Brain, there was Palworld, making specifically creative thinking of all things a pretty hard task to accomplish. What you'll be seeing in this time-lapse is the final draft of this route that I ultimately went with after having already discarded like 7 of them prior. For some reason, what made this one stick better in my mind was starting from the back, with the foot of Mount Chimney reaching into the map. Having already spent so much time on this map, I am a bit overeager to get multiple layers of cliffs drawn in early, but I quickly realized that this was a fruitless task. Thankfully, I am actually able to find a satisfactory shape pretty quickly afterwards, which then allows me to finally draw in a second layer again, as well as adding a third one, while also reserving space for the features on the mountainside that this route already houses in the base game. This area will obviously open up once we get around to creating Hoenn's Wilderness, but spare for a few exceptions like Petalburg Shores and the map you will see in just a bit, this will only happen once all other maps are finished. Now for the route entrance, I decide to go for something rather unusual. Route 116, even in the base game, is what I consider to be the first truly wild route the player gets to visit in Hoenn. In the same way that Route 104 prepares you for the general vibe of your journey, Route 116 prepares you for the feeling you will get from some of the most impressive routes of the game, like 111, 119, and 120, with something to discover hidden in every corner. However, it is also an infrastructure construction project for Rustboro, which is obviously getting a massive expansion, to the point where it will stretch across 2 maps. Keeping all of this as well as the obvious thematic relevance of the Rusturf Tunnel storyline in mind, the entrance to this route is a direct open connection from the park I am adding to Rustboro. This way, it's structurally justifiable for the route to indulge in its wildness while still being directly connected to Rustboro's infrastructure in a way that even helps to create a gradient of nature towards Verdanturf Town, rather than the previous sharp juxtaposition of Hoenn's industrial heart being right next to a little climatic health town. With the extreme ends of the map filled in, I can finally get started on roughly shaping the border and body of the route. It's at this point that I decide to add a body of water to the main area of it. To differentiate this from the ponds on Route 104 and in Petalburg, or the spring lakes on Route 102, the idea for this is to be a drainage pool, where a lot of runoff from Mount Chimney collects in a very mineral-rich temporary pond, creating a unique habitat for Pokémon that are hard to find elsewhere. At this point, I'm starting to feel comfortable with the layout I have going, and decide to go into some deeper detail on the map. And what better way to do this than to remake the cut tree puzzle? Now, I must admit, this puzzle has always kind of bothered me. While puzzles like this one are all over Hoenn, these early routes should serve to introduce them, and while it's anything but the largest of the bunch, this one is also simultaneously one of the most compact and the most complex. While it's definitely not bad to give the player something like this to work on early on, I'd rather ease them in a bit more, so I try to keep the general feel and spirit of this puzzle intact while heavily simplifying it, making the paths available to the player easier to parse, and making them waste less time by putting only 3 cut trees in their way rather than a total of 5. After this, I'm pretty much done with this session, so after provisional rearrangement of all the events on the map, I add the main tall grass areas as well as rock decorations and call it a day before finishing the map with the creative support of a live studio audience. I tend to get lost talking with chat during my streams, so starting off with some detailing work is kind of natural. It allows me to easily keep the conversation going while starting to get into the mapping flow. The first real thing I do, however, is already a big one, replacing the previously roughly blocked out barrier in the center of the map with a piece of wilderness that is encroaching on the route. This will serve not only as a transition to the actual wilderness map that I will be showing you shortly, but also as a natural yet not impenetrable barrier between the 2 parts of the route. For this, I frankly just sprinkle trees into the area at a density I feel works well, and then bunch them together in a way that makes for an open-feeling area that still offers some small, more deliberately pathed spots that reward exploration. After Petalburg Shores went over as well as it did, I really wanted to lean heavily into the wilderness motif in this one, allowing the player to immediately get some early feel for the type of terrain they will be exploring later on in the game on the hunt for rare items and Pokémon. And I must say that after a detailing pass, this area already looks really nice. I round this place out by doing a touch more detailing around the northern part of the route and adding another layer to the mountain area to properly fill the player's view from any point in the map they can access. I now move on to the secondary section of this map. The centerpiece of this newly expanded area is going to be a new raised rock platform, although it itself doesn't have much to offer, rather working as an anchor for all the stuff surrounding it. Originally only reachable through the verdant turf direction of Rusturf Tunnel, the Glasses Guy's humble abode is also now accessible through the Central Barrier Wilderness on the route after the player gains access to Rock Smash, making it accessible much more quickly from the Rustboro side of the map once you were able to go there anyways. Now the idea is that this is going to be a pretty diverse area to offer an even better early feel for the wilderness, so I extended the rock platform a bit to be more balanced before adding a spring lake between it and Mount Chimney. This spring will probably move up the mountain as we create the northwestern wilderness, but this little basin will stay here nonetheless, so it'll suffice for now. You'll see in just a bit what I need this here for, and again, it's also here to diversify this area of the map to help make it more wild. With this, all there is left to do is finish pathing and detailing this area, as well as an addition of a new berry plot as a reward for the player for reaching it, and with that, Route 116 is done. But that is not all, as I now move on to create the first proper wilderness area, which I immediately start off with pulling a river off the hidden spring I just created. This river will split the entire map in 2, effectively acting as an HM gate for the bulk of the map, and will also run through Rustboro, once again as a reference to Fukuoka's many rivers. A little bit of rough borderscaping to get a feel for the confines of what I will be working in later, I add a stretched out rocky hill as another natural divider and centerpiece for this map. It's at this point that I need to give credit to user Miscellanea Maps on Reddit for their awesome anime Hoenn map, which is only one of many sources I take inspiration from, but which this prototype area is essentially directly based on. Once the hill is in place, I return to blocking out some more rough pathways in the southern half of the map, before refining their shapes and breaking up the leftover open areas a bit, as well as polishing the shape of the river and doing a first detailing pass to make the map more readable while I'm still working on it. I start with the final clearing last, working backwards similar to how I did on Route 116. The southern half of the map is essentially split into 3 parts, and this will be the last one the player gains access to, as the only way to access it will be over the hill, blocked by strength boulders, and will thus also house the strongest and rarest Pokémon playtesters will be able to find here. I should note that while a layout similar to this will likely be here in the finished game, this prototype is much less here as a proof of concept for the wilderness idea, though it also serves as that, and much more to be a movement playground for playtesters to have a large area to really take advantage of the new systems in. I start the second clearing off very open, with the idea being that it's a path clearing, with the overgrowth being limited to its sides, as Pokémon from Petalburg Woods would come through here regularly, looking to gain access to the river by going over the hill. I changed my mind on this though, instead choosing to make both traversal and the topography of the location a bit more interesting, by adding a one-way ledge as an extension of the hill, featuring a berry plot to once again encourage thorough exploration, and ultimately daring any player that hasn't found the other way into it to hop down into the now much less accessible clearing, where I fill in what would have been the path now that the ledge interrupts it. This makes the area much denser and plays off the very narrow access path, giving it an almost magical, cozy feel. The third and final clearing takes up the rest of the southern half of this map, offering a new secret base location and being focused on emphasizing use of the new movement system, as I deliberately design very open pathways that are overgrown with tall grass and patterns that allow you to get anywhere connected to this clearing without entering it if you're good at diagonal movement. But obviously I also add some nooks and crannies to once again encourage exploration and help make this feel like an explorable deep forest. Once I'm done with all the clearings, I do a quick pass over the lower half of the map, detailing and raising the density in some spots just a bit more to help guide the player through the clearings better before taking some time doing some borderscaping to take a small break from more active map design. However, I'm not quite done yet, as I still have to do the riverbanks. The northern riverbank, directly connected and open to Route 116, is completely overgrown. Obviously, a common occurrence along most rivers, I designed the layout in a way that makes the river easy to access from the route, whilst making it relatively hard to travel along it, just like overgrowth on a real river. For the southern bank, I choose almost the polar opposite, by basing it on periodically flooding alcoves. As the river comes in with a pretty sharp turn from the north, chances are that parts of the southern bank would be most likely to flood, when the river can't carry all the water that ends up in it, like runoff from Mount Chimney during heavy rainfall. As a result, the vegetation here is similarly dense to the northern bank, though the riverbank itself is very open in mostly separated pockets where flooding occurs. But with that, we have finally reached the end of today's time lapses. Remember that if you want to try out the game for yourself early, you can sign up for a chance to enter the public testing phase with the link down below in the description. A lot of people have been asking if the playtest had already started because I started showing some gameplay images, but no. We are, however, approaching the time for a date announcement very soon, so keep your eyes and ears peeled as I will make sure to announce it here on the channel as soon as I can. I want to apologize again that January was such a slow month with only one proper video. Next week you can look forward to a review of everyone's, including my own, latest Brainworm Palworld, and the week after that we will be doing a big refactoring stream, where we'll be doing everything from going over all maps we've done so far to refine and fix them, to more gameplay demos. So, if you don't want to miss any of that, make sure to subscribe, and while you're already down there, if you liked the video, do just that, let me know what you've thought about today's updates in the comments, and maybe even consider becoming a channel member. Thank you all so very much for watching, and until next time, have a good one.